Molto velocemente introduciamo gli ultimi ospiti di questa mattina, una conversazione tra Kersten Geers e Manuel Orazi. Kersten è un architetto, educatore e scrittore. Insieme a David Van Severen hanno fondato il loro studio Office nel 2002 a Bruxelles e da allora hanno fatto diversi progetti che variano per scala e tipologia, dall'arredamento alla progettazione urbana, menzionando in alcuni dei più recenti l'edificio per la radio-televisione svizzera a Losanna oppure la centrale della VRT a Bruxelles. Ha ricevuto numerosi premi, tra cui il premio belga dell'architettura, il Leone d'Argento alla 12ª Biennale di Architettura di Venezia e il premio Aga Khan per l'architettura, ed ha insegnato in diverse università, quali la Columbia, Yale, ed attualmente è titolare di una cattedra a Mendrisio, l'Accademia di Architettura, e presso Harvard GSD. Manuel invece lavora presso la casa editrice Quodlibet di Macerata, dove si occupa di diverse collane di architettura urbanistica. È docente anche lui presso l'Accademia di Architettura di Mendrisio, collaboratore di periodici come Il Foglio, Domus, Log e Volume, e nel 2021 ha curato la mostra Carla e Monino, Fedeltà al Tradimento, presso la Triennale di Milano. Grazie.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Matteo, also for the invitation. Thank you, Manuel, for having our future conversation. So I was told to give kind of a micro lecture, and I tend to be over-ambitious, so I guess there's far too many slides, so I'll kind of rush through this lecture. I prefer to stand when I do this. I hope you don't mind. I'll stand here. So, I was first of all invited to speak here in this wonderful event. I think it's extremely important to rethink Rome and to think its territory. I think it's a fantastic occasion also to think relationship between territory, architecture, landscape. And of course, I guess in this type of context, we all play some kind of slightly comical role. And it's not different for me. And when I was, in fact, asked to talk about classicism and classicism, I thought, oh yeah, of course, I'm the villain of the argument here. So I propose to talk about this in some sense, but not really, by suggesting to call this small intervention Roman architecture, which I think is apt because here we are in Rome, right? Roman architecture, perhaps because it encompasses, I believe, for the biggest part, that what is our relationship with classicism. I think it's a territorial relationship, it's an infrastructural relationship, it's a relationship through an architecture which is to a certain extent brutal and unresolved, and it's, I think, always a relationship between the figure and the ground in which the landscape plays as much a role as the intervention itself. And I think that negotiation with what you could consider, well, the even covered field or our, I would say, contemporary condition where more or less everything is known and or urbanized in good and bad ways, very often in bad ways, I believe is the context in which, I mean, this desire, and I would argue it's very much an idea of a desire, it's a projection, it's an attributed perspective, as this one is, of course, of an unfinished version of a building never to be completed in the lifetime of its architect. I mean, we all know this one here, was running in Villa Borghese this morning, overlooking, well, say, the final version of it, let's say. And, I mean, this amalgam of things, I believe, is the kernel of our Romanness. With which I want to say that it is very much, and here you see many booklets we made over the years with the students under the moniker Architecture Without Content, and you see Roman architecture is here and there, the Club of Rome is there, I mean there's plenty of things, and I thought, okay, let's go very quickly through this. It was called Roman architecture, and in fact it wasn't at all about Rome, it was about this famous dilettante called Andrea Palladio, who desperately tried to make things Roman in the periphery of Vicenza. And hence, I mean, in some way, of course, did things territorial, agricultural, transformative architecture, because none of these buildings were, in fact, started from scratch, and in many respects, machine-like, you know. So this idea, and that's why also I showed this little booklet, of Romanness in the detail, but also in the urban gesture, and in an architecture which never quite forgets that it's in deep relationship with the territory, with the landscape, I guess, is is what has always driven us. So second example of the many publications, of course, of the last years is this book I did together with Jelena Pancevac, which is about Aldo Rossi, which is the other dangerous topic you could tackle in Italy, but we thought, why not? You know, we kind of base our kind of track on this book, on that work, on this famously mistranslated Fatto Urbano, an urban artifact, which we thought it's good to make a book called The Urban Fact, so as close to Fatto Urbano one could be, and hence also I would say de-objectifying artifact and kind of turning it to fact, in other words, something which is far more ambiguous, far more weird, and perhaps more precise in terms of what Rossi was really after. And then documenting buildings which were essentially suburban, or in other words, buildings made in the late 60s, early 70s, in an attempt to urbanize in a point-like manner, almost acupunctural, in figures I would consider to be Roman, and of course the most famous one here, Faiano Lona School, fantastically photographed by Stefano Graziani. I mean, it shows that it's, again, between the desire of an architecture proper, a proper positioning, I would say an autonomy of the figure itself, but nevertheless a certain relativism from the autonomy of the figure towards the territory with which it negotiates, that makes this building, that figure, that civic figure, I think it's very important, it's a civic gesture, somewhat survive. So voila, this was the intro. Now the real projects. The projects, I want to show a few very quickly. Projects, the first one here, we developed together with Bas Metso, the people who were here yesterday. I think they must have seen it already, because we just chatted a bit about this. We are in Bahrain, we are in Muharraq, and what we are having, in a way, is the question of a place, and I go very quickly through this, the question of a place to, on the one hand, I would say, restructure, reorganize, repair its urban fabric, to project an idea of its own history, Berling, on this very site, and making it in some way visitable. So, in a sense, you could say two very conflicting concepts. A concept of making a path, which is entirely artificial, from one building to another, leftovers of another history, another time. On the other hand, trying to reorganize the spaces in between. I think we here developed this idea of, in a way, like breadcrumbs, an idea, an element of making spaces which on themselves, I mean, are contributions to its own cityness, and then perhaps using this as a spine for development within this city proper. It's architecture, it's urbanism, it's landscape design, it's many things. So, well, I go very quickly through these. I mean, this in a way explains the context. We made also a couple of small buildings in that same maze, which is here, as you can see, is what we call then the Dar, which is a confusing name on itself, because Dar is house, and in a way it's a mejlis, it's kind of a public house in that very path, which is immediately connected to the ephemeral idea of purling and the music which is made in relationship to that. But more importantly, it's this set of squares, and I'm sure Bas explained them perhaps a little bit more profoundly, so but here I see them rather as an example of this repetition of one figure with slightly different dimensions, with this particular idea of vegetation. You saw some prehistory of these things, which tends to organize a space. Not different from anything Roman, I would say. So here you see a couple of these squares. You see these dots, which are in fact lampposts. The squares have the same lampposts. The squares themselves are almost like pieces of carpet or kind of virtual rooms in the fabric. And all together, they make, in a way, on the one hand, a very dominant, a very particular road through the fabric. But even so, you could say they revive, they take away the cars, they revive these neighborhoods, and they turn into very small public spaces. So here you see some pictures, I think. So here, actually, this was the prototype. And then the set of squares, a few of these pictures, which time and again you see, in a way, try to delineate, try to find their proportion, but also are as a set of spatial types, as series in that sense, so which organize the very fabric they inhabit. So this idea of organizing space and bringing in hierarchies, which I believe is very important, is of course here perhaps it's most explicit. I mean, it's a city, it's a fabric, it's a space, it's a square, it's a bench, it's a lamp. Here, I mean, there where it was, in that sense, of course, a modern society where the romanticism of the Arab maze was absent because land regained, kind of made place for a gigantic kind of highway-like infrastructure. The castle, originally part of this set, had to be reached. So in a sense, we proposed to make this a gigantic line, which is the last stretch, almost like a pier, you could say, bridge-like pier, to that castle as the final connection with the water. So that's that bridge. The bridge is built. I mean, it's in the same kind of pearling color, as you can see, pearl modern, and voila. Now, this space as space and carve out, but also space as infrastructure, I believe is the most explicitly developed in this project. It's a project we've been building, so to speak, for 10 years. I mean, we designed it 10 and a half years, almost 11 years ago. It forever was delayed, and ultimately it started to get built. And what I like very much is that after this kind of sandy world of Bahrain, you see this, and everybody thinks Switzerland, it's the most beautiful country outside of Europe. And at the same time, it's just the same. It's what they call in French pavillionaire. It's a kind of print plate of endless box-like buildings. Everything which is not unbuildable is built. So that very context is really exactly the same. We just forget that the mountains are in fact France, and you know the Swiss sell them as theirs. So here we go. It's a context of a campus, and the campus is many buildings and a bit of green and a bit of buildings again, and a radio and television company, national radio and television company, wanting to inhabit the last open bit of that campus. And we believed that next, of course, to this marvelous building of Sanaa, the learning center, at the same time, it was almost impossible not to think we had to rebalance something which is, on the one hand, this gigantic print plate, a kind of attempt for a campus here, an endless amount of suburban housing. So what could we do? Is it possible with one building? I mean, in that sense, Belvedere-like in ambition, 10 years in the making, in one building, connecting all these pieces, making urbanity as a building proper. So in a sense, whereas the squares you saw before carve out space and try to maintain this, I think here it's an attempt to settle this space, to for once and for all try to combine, so to speak, an endlessness and an object-like kind of organization. We all know the references. So here you see the tests, you see the models, you see some Baldassari, which we like a lot, and we like him specifically in how he manages to put images under pressure by just adding squares and circles, by hiding, by showing, by shifting. And I think this general approach, I mean, I would dare to argue Roman in attempt, Roman in desire, was there to make a building which is ultimately typologically extremely simple. It's one big plate with sheds, which is anyway the type of the big kind of production hall, you could say, but here to produce media, kind of carried and organized and cut into pieces by these 4 buildings which are boxes. The boxes are either real office building or are boxes for production, so spaces in spaces where openness is the key in the field. A kind of closedness is in a way the idea and the desire in the boxes. So here you see that below, and these contemporary media buildings work like I would say fire stations. Why? Because there's not any more typical studios in the building proper, but studios are in trucks. It's a real plug-in city. I mean, in that sense, these trucks, they arrive, they record an event in these big boxes, and they drive for another event, a news item, and so forth. The trucks need to be maintained, and they need to be parked. So it's very interesting how, in a way, building here, although media changes so quickly, and of course it does. I mean, we already know how now we don't watch television, we listen to radio, we download, we look at our phones, but nevertheless, this infrastructure, and the more physical it gets, remains somehow the same and needs to be open to endless reinterpretations. So again there, if I refer to Roman or the classic in that sense, for us what's fundamental is this kind of, I would say this extreme formalism of these buildings allow them to include, incorporate, to transform, to endlessly change in what they actually are, because their DNA, the base of this, what the building is, I mean, the figure, the hypothetical ideal figure remains the same. So here you see that, here you see the final images for the client now during construction, and here you see it inside. And here you see the construction proper. So you see these, in a way, insanely complex beams, these Warren trusses, which carry this shed, which of course, shed to the north, a minimum of energy and stuff like that. I think it's important because this durability lays in two aspects. It lays in the very fact that these buildings are built in an extremely Spartan and simple way, despite what you think you see. But also, that is that these buildings, they are so not program connected or programmatically defined that their durability is in their own spatiality, in their kind of, I would say, their obnoxiousness, if you want. So, voila. So here you go, here you see, it's not ready yet. You see it next to the learning center, and you see, in a way, the ultimate consequence of a building, which is everything at the same time. So, everything at the same time you certainly have here in Charleroi. We moved to Charleroi, which is a fantastic place. Maybe Bas showed things of Charleroi too. I don't know if he did. He didn't. He could have. He's also working there. He also, by the way, works on the landscape of the building you saw before. We seem to do everything together. Huh? Anyways, either way, Charleroi, it's a fantastic place, I have to say. I discovered it late. This is not an old picture. This is Charleroi kind of today. It's quite crazy. It has this endless amount of artificial hills, this terrils. It has this big leftover buildings, like say remnants of Becher, one could see it with a certain romantic twist. And it has a lot of this land which looks in a way greener than you expect because it's all leftover post-industrial land. And like this terrils, they left them for what they were and they became potentially, I would say, parks. So here, again, the building which we're designing, we're developing, is part of a complete new dynamic of this city. The city is very interesting in that it understood that the only way forward, and I wanted to show it here, both because of its scale, as you can see, but also because of how just one figure can somehow express this desire of what a city in all its disarray, of course Charleroi is not Rome, could be. So I showed you this. Just heard the archipelago before. I think there's this other archipelago, very interesting. The archipelago also of things natural, but in a way always somehow artificial. So here with the students be working last semester and again this semester in Mendrisio on redrawing the whole of Charleroi. And what you see is you have this map of in a way a green city, a green archipelago, a large city, which is essentially made with all these terrils, with these leftover spaces, and where all of a sudden, if one thinks simply 10 years forward in another way of transport and stop thinking of a centralized figure, in one step, you have the most beautiful place to live in. You can live next to terrils. We walked. We were hiking on these terrils. They're fantastic because they're totally untouched. And the very fact that they originated as artificial remnants of a process is entirely gone. So you have a pure, radical, green, cut up, collage-like, I would say, new kind of large city. So in that city, and of course our building is a building, you think some are here, and we didn't choose that, that's how it works with clients, right? But at the same time, I believe we could bring in some sense, this notion of this scale. So what is it? It's a new factory, a new kind of production building for satellites. So it's a building. You see it here. We did some tests in the office of size and scale. It's big. It's offices and a big, what they call mega factory. I think they were vaguely inspired by this American entrepreneur of the electric cars. Either way, it was interesting to understand that they wanted to make an enormous building, and for that, the first thing they wanted to do was destroy a very beautiful building, and then somehow turn it into a new office building, and then a box. The ambition with these type of buildings is, of course, always extremely low. It's production, production, production. It's a rectangular cube. That's it. But we somehow could convince them that this building should be saved. It was not today in the same state as you see it here in the picture. It's an exoskeleton. It's Corten steel. It's in a way, I would say, renovatable. unless you take away all the glass, you don't want the inside to be inside. We propose to turn it into the parking garage of the complex, because they needed a parking garage, and they wanted, in fact, to use the snippet of green as their parking. Said, no way, this is stupid. I mean, you park here, you work here, and you connect from the parking to the building. So that's, in a way, the DNA of the figure. An office building, one floor on top with these round patios, a parking building, which is the renovated, the recovered, the saved figure of the office building, and a bridge. So you see it here. You see some studies on the material. You saw some satellites here, right? I mean, satellites. Okay. And then here you see the top. You see the transformed building. You see the bridge. You see the mega factory, as they call it. You see the connection to the bridge. So we start now, I think, in 2-3 weeks, we start building this. So this is exciting. You see, ultimately, it's extremely simple type. It's a rectangular production unit, leftover space for all the logistics and the ducts and the organization of that space, and the offices above. You see that here. And that made in corrugated aluminium, perforated, very cheap in some sense, but also in a way, again, completely disconnected from whatever happens there. I mean, whether, what they exactly do to make satellites, we have no clue. So voilà. So here you see that, and voilà. So this kind of accumulation of figures is different and more dirty than that one, which is, Flanders, very close. Sorry. It's Flanders, it's houses, and these houses needed a library. The library is, in a way, a big house. I think is an important idea for us. A big house as being a building which is public, but is not public in the fact that it's transparent, and it wants to not express its publicness in easy accessibility. It develops a threshold. The threshold, in a way, makes a space. The space has a garden. The garden is the library garden, the reading garden. So you see this here. You see the figure next to the school. There's a story in why we put it there. It includes some classrooms of the school. In a way, it's the first public building in this, in a way, rich neighborhood, which doesn't pay taxes, north of Ghent. You see that here. The garden is, in a way, the big public gesture. The figure, to a certain extent, of the library organizes, dominates, and to a certain extent makes or expresses its own, civic values. So here you see that. I go very fast, as you can see, so we can still talk. Manuel, I promise. And then I finish, after this, with the very last one. It's a machine, but these machines, they need as much care and as much urban desire as any of the others. So this machine, which is a contemporary brewery in Brussels, on the canal, is essentially the cheapest thinkable box. It's a box with a roof. The roof is slightly open. The glass is the glass you would use for greenhouses. Inside there's a set of tables. The tables have all these brewery vats. The brewery vats make beer, as you can see. There's 4 windows, plenty of machines. But ultimately, despite everything, this building managed to make this a beer garden, a square, a space for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for my voice. Yes, I proposed the title as CLASSICISMS, like an homage to Roman historian of architecture, Giorgio Ciucci, who was one of my master. And also because the plural of classicism should highlight how plural are the possible interpretation, but surely I think in general in the various scenario where office, studio worked, I think we could say that the strategy of using the same element helps for the organization of the territory, of an urban space, of a larger, no more what used to be the city, like in the case of Charleroi, which are an extreme case of sprawl, of postmodern city, or in Brussels, around neglected areas like the one of the beer factory. So, and I think it's this idea of repetition elements helps in different scenarios to I mean, sorry, this is a question that would like to do later, but staying on the classic, only 3 questions. The first one, you know, Italo Calvino say the classic is always a rereading of something, of work, and a new reading is always a rereading. And so also the parallel work that you do in the universities, where you do in publication, the Everything collection on Rossi, on De Carlo, of Aldo Van Eyck, and many other teams like you showed very quickly, but it's in parallel to the design project. And so in a way the work on Charleroi, on Bahrain, is a work of rereading. So in this sense, it could be intended as a classic strategy or classicistic.
Well, I guess, I mean, if I understand you well, Manuel, yes, I mean, I think any project has, there's probably many layers, but I think you deal with the world, you deal with, you know, reality. I mean, you know, the world urbanized, topography, endless interventions on the landscape, on the terrain, where by definition you operate as an extra layer to that. That's one aspect. At the same time, I believe as an architect you also operate within a cultural context, right? And that cultural context is also, you could say, the accumulation of every single project, every single iteration of architecture already done. And so it's, I think architecture unavoidably deals with what's already there, but on both levels, the mental, cultural level, and the physical reality. But it's always reworking in that sense. And I think it only when you realize that, so that you feel whatever you do, you make a footnote, you make a twist. That's this almost Baldassari-esque, you know, intervention on an existing picture, existing in the sense that it's all the other tropes of architecture already, but existing in the sense that, you know, there is always already something on the site. I think that's unavoidable, and I would argue, would agree somehow with you. I guess that's the core of our classicism to a certain extent, if it is there, yes.
Another aspect, I think, of classicism is expressed like the Gruppo 7, Giuseppe Terragni, Figini Pellini, all Lombard, Milanese architects more or less, but in the 20s, clearly, the fascist period, were focused on Roman architecture and brought this beautiful sentence that Rome built through types. The arch, the thermal baths, the forum, the doors, etc. And that they were saying, their classicist attitude were saying modernity in Roman architecture, through Roman architecture, because they were seeing new types, the postal office, the train stations, the hotel, which were new in the 20th century. And so in a way, I would make a question about the use of types more than typology, which I think it's something slightly different, because you in your work in design studio, you showed some types for the library, for the public space. For the public space in Bahrain, it's one type in the end, deformed but adapted to the space you have. Do you use type, or do you think it's something no more usable?
Well, yeah, you know, I think we have to be careful to cancel ideas, because I think every idea had good and bad incarnations in some sense. I think type is important in our office, but it's important in the most loose and light way. In so much that, I mean, actually, I can even say this. I mean, in the very beginning, I have these 2 slides. This one, which is this aqueduct, which is actually in, I didn't say it, it's in Carthago. It's not here in Rome. I thought it was fun. It's Tunisia. It's still there. I saw it not so long ago, like a few weeks ago. It's extremely beautiful. It's Hadrian, I think. And it's useless, of course, but it organizes this whole landscape in its remnant, in its ruin, in some sense. The other one is Flanders, of course. It's just Flanders. There's nothing in Flanders. I mean, it's just fields and a road, and it stops, and then some houses, and then something else again. And the last one I just added this morning, which was this drawing, which I wrongly thought was van Heemskerk, but in fact it's Sangallo who made this perspective of the, I'll say, of the building of the Belvedere of Bramante under construction. And of course it was a bizarre endeavor, because the guy started or convinced Julius II to do this building, and he knew he was obviously going to die long before the building was ready. So there was a kind of figure, there was kind of a spatial type, I mean, connecting the villa on the hill with like the papal headquarters as a thought, and then these two sides. But as much as it was typological, or it was a type, it was a desire, it was a projected idea. So I believe that if we use type, then we don't do it in this Durand-like way, you know, like, and I have colleagues, and we all know them, who do that very strict, and this is this, and this is that, you know, almost like prescriptive. I think, no, it's, and that's why I like so much the box. The box is great, because the box is everything, you know? Everything ultimately is a box, you know? And so is now a box a type, or is the box an idea, a metaphor, you know? I don't know, an image. And so yes to type, but while saying yes, we say no to type, you know? Because the type becomes the box, and the box becomes a painting, say, by Ed Ruscha, and then the box has all these words on it. But it's not anymore the words which Venturi thought the box had, because the box of Venturi had a word saying, buy chicken here, or I don't know, go eat there. No, the box of today is where I found my chicken burger through my phone, and I entered that box, and I didn't realize what was written on the box, but there's plenty of signs on that same box, and that's exciting. So I think if we are classicist, or if we're Roman, or if we're whatever we are, I think we are all of this because we can't help ourselves but work within that legacy. But we realize that all these figures we make have absolutely not anymore the slightest connection with how they were used. So if a figure is looking like another figure, that's important, culturally important. But it's a false friend. And we made once a booklet, actually it was also called Roman Architecture, and the subtitle was False Friends. So everything looks like something, and you think you know what it is because it looks like that, but in fact it's something else. But still what it does, it organizes our space. It makes distinctions, it makes hierarchies, it makes our mind, you know, it gives our mind tangible points of reference. It's real. Because ultimately I think in our current world, the only thing which we can offer as architects is reality.
I don't want to bore you with another question on anti-classicism, because it's funny that an anti-classicist like the Roman historian critic Bruno Zevi was looking for the Steil and the Dutch and Flanders neoplasticism as answer, solution to destroy classicism. On the contrary, many Flanders or Dutch architects look to Rome to the other opposite, including Rem Koolhaas, who did a remarkable essay on the Roman colonies in North Africa, because there they are more pure, they're more classic, the architecture, the types. In Rome, no, because Rome has become something else. There are palazzini, the sea of palazzini, villini, etc. But this maybe it's academic intention on classicism and anti-classicism. I will give space for questions from the public, because I think we have 10 minutes or no?
Huh, sorry. We go too fast.
I was scared by the timing, sorry. So I don't know if there are questions. Giorgio, dove sei?
Giorgio run away.
No.
Should you give a short Italian summary?
No. Stefano Boeri told me that because of my voice.
Okay.
Well, if no one has a question, maybe I'm quite interested. We looked a lot to your production as an architect with your office, but there is also a huge production as an educator. So as also yesterday lecture by Bas Metz, he tackled, you know, how, not necessarily influential, but the importance of also of teaching has for him. I was just wondering, how do you necessarily do you choose the topics that you tackle with your students? Do you also, Baz was mentioning how important it is, for example, to have a relationship with the municipality where they go and work in order to have somehow a very complex and systemic approach to the arguments they tackle. And I wonder also if in your case with the topics you trigger, this is the case, or what is the, let's say, the ITER?
Oh, yeah, well, if I may, I start with your last part. Well, yeah, first, no, maybe the first part is easy. Yes, teaching is very important for me, for us as an office, but it's true that of the two of us, David and myself, I would say I'm more of the teacher type, it seems. I don't know why. Either way, I mean, I do believe that it kind of, it brings back topics to the office, or it's a kind of an oscillation between what we do and what we investigate. I mean, I've been teaching for many years, and especially for, I mean, probably for 25 years, but especially for 14, 15 years, systematically, first as this architecture without content, and then afterwards in what is now called everything. And what is, I guess, important is that has been very much with a same team. I mean, there's people who change, but very little. So it's not my project, it's our project. I think it's a wider project than mine alone. And Jelena had been mentioned. She has been involved in this project, I think, for more than 10 years. I think it's important. I mean, other people, very good friends, dear friends, Andrea Zanderigo at a certain time was teaching with me for a long time. Now, what I want to say with this is that I think our teaching has always been more independent from municipalities, as you were mentioning, Bas is doing. I think partly because I believe it starts from the cultural perspective towards architecture. It has a very territorial aspect, I believe, but I always felt that you do not have time in the practice to think. And for me, teaching is where you can think. And so to kick out, at least temporarily, to maximum effect, any other influence in a certain train of thought has always been, I think, very productive for us. So I think it's been a laboratory where we develop certain associations. And I wouldn't go further than that, because I don't think we don't develop theory. I'm not sure if architects manage to develop theory. They have the tendency to sell observations as theory. And I think that's also kind of what we do. There's an accumulation of observations, there's associations, there's, I mentioned, false friends. And of course, it's very, to a very big extent, it's I think in the tradition, and he was not the only one, but also what Matthias Ungers was doing his Berlin studios for many years. I think he made 26 booklets, if I'm not mistaken, of his laboratory on Berlin. Of course, a few of them very famous. I mean, like the ones he did in the very end, and in a way post-fact a bit, like the Green Archipelago, but very many other ones, I mean, in the mid-60s already. And what I've always liked very much is that there's a seriality to it. And I really embrace that seriality, which is that all work of every student is equal. So we show always everything. And B, it's in agreeing on a set of kind of formats that things become comparable. And that's a bit Sol-Lewitt in some sense, I guess, but to the extent that I think so you manage to produce content, but that's implicit. It happens, you know, because of these agreements. And then I think it feeds back to the practice. But it's topics. It's even true that, for example, we did the Venturi book somehow on the side, the urban the difficult whole, sorry. Then we made this Rossi book, the Urban Fact. We've now been forever working on this Ungers book, which is called The Large Form. But then in parallel, now more recently, I think we put out flags in worlds which I think fascinate us, but which are a little bit, I would say, less evident. I mean, Aldo and Hani van Eyck, Giancarlo Di Carlo, Ichigo Hasegawa. I think it's important. It's important to challenge yourself. Otherwise, you die. It would be pity.
And also, maybe as a last question, if there are not others, could be about this strategy. In a way, we were discussing on the train yesterday this, that very often you use the opportunity of design, of architectural project, to do planning through small design, like in the case of Bahrain, but less evident in other projects, because planning somehow has disappeared, and this I found very Roman, where planning never worked in the past. So you have only the opportunity of big projects to influence the city, like they try Quaroni, everybody, Aimonino, Roma 3 University. We don't have to go back to 100 years ago, to La Sapienza, to Piacentini, who did that. But in a way, it's the only through buildings that now seems it's possible planning, not only Rome, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure if the word building is right. I think through projects. Because I think not to sound very contemporary, because we all sound now very contemporary, which is okay. No, I think the project is in many respects the key to the city, I believe. But of course, the project can be quite big. The project can be complex. The project can be natural, can be artificial, or is by definition artificial, even if it presents itself as natural. It can be territorial, and that to a certain extent brings us back to Roman architecture, and that's why I wanted to bring it up as a topic today, as an answer to your question about classicism, because I think any project Roman, from the very small point like to the line like to the territorial, is a project. And the project somehow always understands that it might not be fully realized. It's also a desire, in a sense. But it's within that desire, within its own imagery, that it's powerful and it's able to change, and to change our view on the city.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.